Hey, everybody. Great to see all y'all out there out in YouTube land. Hey, we got a great one for you today. And what are we doing? Eric and I are starting a brand new series. Yes, you heard that correct. We are starting a brand new series. And what is this brand new series called? It is called Parking in the Rear. Yes. And for those who don't quite understand what that means, well, we are going to be examining the social circles around the Alfred Hunt Howell social milieu. And of course, Alfred Hunt Howell's wife's name was Ruth Rea Howell. And the Rea family is very important in our discussion. So, since we're going to be in this topic for a little while, and we're going to be really going into we're going to be going deep into the subject. This is going to be another Psychiatric Sunday type of series that Eric and I are embarking on. We don't know where it's going. We don't know when it's going to end. And we are so much looking forward to it. So what are we doing? We're parking in the rear. We're parking in the rear for a little while. And Moet, she's got it right. Parking in the rear. Whoops. Sorry, parking in the rear. Yes. But before we start today, I actually want to take it back a little bit. I want to get serious for a second. I just want to offer my condolences to the great detective Mike Lorenzo. Some of you might have heard that there was a Yonkers detective named Del Caraballo who died unexpectedly, died suddenly this past week. He was driving on the West Side Highway and had some sort of medical incident and was pronounced dead when they brought him to the hospital. Turns out that Detective Mike Caraballo of the Yonkers Police Department is Mike Lorenzo's brother-in-law. So we just want to give a big shout out to and of condolences to Mike Lorenzo and, of course, his sister for their loss. So, well, guys, we got a lot to unpack today. We are starting our Parking in the Rear series with a discussion and basically a little mini series that we're going to go on about the Seton Park Dome. Yes. And why are we talking about the Seton Park Dome? Well, because the Seton Park Dome was a social experiment. There can be no other way to put it, which involved the youth of Riverdale and which was brainchilded at the elite Riverdale Neighborhood House. Of course, started with Dodge money. And of course, Ruth Rea Howell not only was a Dodge grandchild, she was a Rea. I mean, she was a Dodge in that family, but she also wrote the book, The Dome People by Ruth Howell, where she didn't use her name, but her middle name, but that was her. And interestingly enough, I've been going on this whole Ruth Rea Howell trip, and I've been finding all these other little interesting books. I just got this one, A Crack in the Pavement, by, again, Ruth Howell and Arlene Strong. And these are essentially children's books, great photographs in here, pretty interesting text. But of course, we're going to be parking in the rear today with the Dome People. And the Dome is a very interesting subject. It was originally brought up in the Son of Sam days. And I brought it up when we were talking about Alfred Hunt Howell as a possible Mr. Real Estate. This was before I woke up. This was during the months when I actually thought that there was a Mr. Real Estate and that that Maury Terry was a truthful author, and I was really trying to unpack the information that I was finding out. And Alfred Hunt Howell's name came up, and I did a walk and talk back then, which some of you who were with me from the beginning might remember. And I walked up to the Dome site and I talked about the Dome. And of course, all of a sudden it became grist for the mill. All the Manny haters out there, the very few of them that are out there, but there's a few dedicated ones, hardcore Manny haters. Somehow or other, it got from me talking about the Dome to they turned it into I was a member of a satanic cult who whose parents were intergenerational Satanists, and my parents brought me into the Dome to participate in a satanic ritual where I was molested and so on and so forth. Well, none of that is true. I asked of course, it's just not true, but I did ask my mom the other day, like, what was the deal with the Dome? I was in there, and she didn't remember bringing me there, but she had brought me to Seton Park many times in those years. So we're just both assuming that one day we just walked into the Dome, and I was alive during the time when it was up. It was put up in 72, and it was arsoned in 77, and then they tore down the burnt out superstructure by 78. So I was definitely alive. I was 5 years old when they tore it down. And so I do remember it. I do remember being inside, and that memory has actually haunted me ever since I'm a little child. I remember lying in a stroller, looking up and seeing these multicolor plexiglass triangles in the ceiling. I will never forget: red, blue, white, all sorts of different colors. And then when I worked at the Riverdale Press in 2007, I was lucky enough to work with an editor, Richie Stein, of course, of the Riverdale Press, and he was the architect of the dome. And we'll talk about that today. So we got a lot to get into. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. You know why I'm getting a little ahead of myself? Because I'm forgetting. As I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm not really forgetting, but I'm neglecting the fact that it ain't about me. It's about we. So, would you all give a hand to the most dapper gentleman in the land? You all know him, and you all love him. This series would not be the same without him, and we are so excited that the following gentleman isn't here. So, may I present to you the one, Moet. I think you know what's coming next. The only Eric Galati. Eric.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
great to be here. This is a great show. I love, that shirt you're wearing is perfect for the time. You see the pink and blue? I
yeah.
actually had a vest, a waistcoat, bell-bottom trousers, that color. It was really, I was working at May's department store, and I
Yeah.
bought it, and it was wild. You know what I mean? Nobody ever thought, hey, the guy's wearing pink. It was wild. It was like the psychedelic look and all of
Listen,
that.
listen, Eric, man, I'm black. I mean, that's what people don't understand. I'm just honoring my heritage, and I'm not kidding. My sister did her DNA, and it came back as 4% Bantu African. So I always said to myself, that's where I get my soul from. Yeah. So as soon as I found that out, I went and bought some dashikis in honor of my heritage and my
Ah,
history. And yes, yes, yes. So Eric, I gotta say to you, and of course to everybody out there, that Eric has become such a hero in this case behind the scenes, such a hero in this story. The people that he's talking to and getting all sorts of information from, you just would not believe the things that we're getting. And deep history, deep first person history. I don't want to go too much into those details because we'll bring that information to you guys as we go along. But Eric,
as we go
you're
along. But
you're
one of
in your element, man. You're having a great time.
I'm having great. I was on a high, and as we go along, I might mention one of them because it is very important to the biography of the dome. Very
Yes,
important.
and
Many
we'll get it.
questions answered, and they were answered joyfully by a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, of course, before we get too deep, I just want to quickly explain to the audience why Eric and I chose to do a spin-off series called Parking in the Ria. And I explained this a little bit in my most recent walk and talk. If you haven't seen that, I suggest that you after today's episode, go and check it out. A lot of people were really happy to see me back on the trails, talking out on the streets, and said it reminded them of the old days. But as we went along in the Alfred Hunt Howell case, the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell, which is not finished, by the way, we still have quite a few shows left to do, and we're working on stuff behind the scenes. I personally realized that these social circles, these circles of the Rea family, the Dodge Foundation, the Plimptons, the Perkins, the Freemans, the Delafields, all of these uber elite families of Riverdale, the Curlins, the Guns, and so on and so forth.
Wiley's,
The
Plimpton.
Wileys, right? All of these names that we are not only learning about but speaking to as well. These people are extremely important part of American history. I mean, let's just face it. These people are very influential, have been extremely influential, and it's my contention that this is the most important potential sort of deep staters, if you will, that you never heard of. This is a network of people around the Dodge family and coming out of Riverdale and starting these projects like the Riverdale Neighborhood House and the Dome, and getting into areas of children's education and mental health, amongst many other things that they've been involved with for the last 200 years. These are people that need to be discussed historically, not only in a historical way, but in a contemporary way as well. These networks are still out there today. The Dodge family is still giving huge amounts of money to all sorts of social groups. And so these families carry on their traditions, and they've been doing it up till now fairly unnoticed. Yeah, everybody's into the Rockefellers, everybody's into the Soroses, everybody's into the Bill Gates of the world, and the Rothschilds and all of these people. Even Samuel Untermeyer gets examined, but nobody has ever talked about the Dodge family. And it's my contention, and I'm not speaking for Eric here, he can speak for himself, that these people are extremely important and need to be historically examined. And that's the purpose of
important, Manny. They're what used to be called old American money. It's the British Americans. Many of them were Scottish, not all. The Dodgers and the Perkins were Scottish. Delafield, I have to recall where they come from in Britain. And we hear of the Dodge Foundation, but what about the Dodge family? We hardly hear of them. And then we had that where the Dodgers, before they were in the copper mining, ultra rich, from Boston, the center of economics before Manhattan, they were going to Syria and Lebanon with the American University of Beirut.
Right, and the American University of Beirut is something that has been studied. I got to be honest, I haven't done too much looking into it, but when you bring up AUB, the American University of Beirut, a lot of the older conspiracy heads out there are like, AUB, that's like a center of all the activity, right? So I want to examine this. I mean, and Alfred Hunt Howell was a trustee and on the board of the American University of Beirut. Plimpton was on the board and trustee of the American University of Beirut. These were the people who came back and then headed places like Columbia University and Amherst College, and were extremely influential in social engineering. And we're not using that term in a negative way. It's just true in social engineering. And the Dome Project, it's my belief, Eric, that the Dome Project is one of these experiments. And what we want to do is examine in this series about the Dome was it an experiment gone right or an experiment gone wrong? And what were the ramifications? Who was affected? Who was part of it? And of course, as we go along, we're hoping to get more and more people involved.
What I studied, I found it to be quite idealistic, romantic, and then all of a sudden it turns upside down and it's sad. Very sad.
Exactly, and it ends up being burnt down. Now, of course, I brought up in my walk and talk that the possibility exists that David Berkowitz, the son of Sam himself, burnt down the Dome. He does have, Eric, a log in his arson files, 237th Street off of Douglas Avenue, and that's right where the Dome is. He's getting the blocks wrong a little bit. There actually is no 237th; it's 235th. But for all we know, in '77, when it was actually arsoned, it was David Berkowitz. It could have been. But we also go ahead.
At that time, there were many pyromaniacs, from what I've understood from Jim Fay and John Mario Comparetto and Rinciari. They were dispatchers. Many pyromaniacs at that time in the Bronx.
Oh, hell yeah. And you and I were on the phone yesterday with a guy who said that he, in a manic episode.
I'm laughing when I think of.
I know. We're going to introduce him as we go. He's a great guy. He's been very helpful. And he told. Yeah, he told us he tried to burn the Dome down as well. So anyway, we're getting into the weeds. We're parking in the Rea. Yeah. But we got a lot to do today, Eric. And so today what I wanted to do with the audience's sake is, before we get into examining the deep cultural history, the connections between the people who were the brainchilds of this, the questions that arise about who were the personalities involved, the intrigue. Given the fact, Eric, that you and I spoke to a gentleman named Alphonse Gavila, who was fired from the Dome and had some issues with the Dome, and there was like conflicts. Before we get into all of that on subsequent shows, I think it just behooves us, Eric, to just take a trip down memory lane and
Yeah.
look at a couple of cultural artifacts. The first will be the this book. We'll look at some pictures out of this very interesting book by Ruth Rea Howell. Again, we're parking in the Rea. And then I was sent an 18-minute long video movie, actually, that was done by the Riverdale Neighborhood House in 1972 about the Dome. And nobody has ever seen this movie before. In fact, I could have posted it, but I've been holding it in secret now for about a month. And so we'll look at it because not only is it a very interesting cultural artifact of the early 70s and the counterculture, Eric, but I think that there's information to be gleaned out of that movie as well. So
I think so, because we have to give the history of it, and the history coincides also with architectural history, environmental history, and the counterculture, a negative facet of the counterculture, the narcotics addictions, and trying to wipe that away, because the counterculture was very dark, and it was not one dimensional. There were environmentalists, but also people who wanted architecture instead of saving land and everything. It's multifaceted. Can I just make one comment? I find it interesting that we are getting people in chat that I've never seen before, maybe for a long time, who have a specific interest in this topic. It's quite interesting.
oh well, we're hitting all the Riverdale people. Of course, this is a very niche topic, and I expect to hemorrhage viewers like crazy. I mean, this is not Son of Sam. This is not a universally known thing. Although I will say for myself that I find this infinitely more interesting than Son of Sam ever was. And especially once we found out that Disco Dave acted alone. Now, Eric, you and I still to this day have slight disagreements about that.
And I want to say to everybody, Manny and I are in agreement with everything, but we have our own personalities, and our disagreements don't cause us to argue. The slight disagreement is this: it's very slight. I can perhaps agree with Manny that the Lord of Life, David Berkowitz, did it alone. But within me, I feel there might have been other people. That goes back to Patrick O'Shaughnessy and certain police I've spoken to since then who haven't even been on the show. But Manny might even be very correct on this. No.
But yeah, but this is a niche story, and yeah, I find it super interesting.
But it's thanks to the Son of Sam case that we come here, though.
Correct. So, Eric, we got a lot to do today, so best to just get right in it. So, everybody, strap yourselves in for a look down memory lane at the Seton Park Dome. Yes. And of course, this picture was taken by Alphonse Gavila, who was a youth worker at the Riverdale Neighborhood House and who we have established a very positive relationship with. And it looks retouched, actually, or painted over. But this is an actual scan of an actual photograph given to me by a gentleman named Tom Martin, who was part of the building team of the Dome. Very interesting cat in his own right. And so this dome, of course, was located in Seton Park. And that's why it's called, as Moet says, the Seton Park Dome. Yes. And so this picture was sent to me on Facebook the other day. It's a picture from the 50s, before, of course, Seton Park was built, before there was ever a dome. So it's kind of hard for the heads out there to get orientated here. Okay. But in my walk and talk that I just did to introduce this series, I showed the front of PS 24. This is 24. This is the elementary school that Nikolai and I went to right here. Okay. And just so we see it here, it's right here in this Google Earth. We'll actually look at it in Google Earth in a second, because I think it's important to place this dome in a historical in a plot of land. So this is, of course, Riverdale of the 1950s, much less developed than it is today. And in this area here is now the modern day Seton Park. Okay, there's actually an avenue, Independence Avenue, that has been cut through these woods here. Okay, and it goes all the way down to here. This is Independence Avenue right here, and it goes all the way down to here, and so on and so forth. And Seton Park is right across the street, and much like Untermeyer Park, it was one of these places with an abandoned huge mansion slash hospital on it right here. If anybody could see, it's a little hard to discern right here,
It's
but there
quite
was a
clear, actually.
yeah, there was a huge, old edifice on this plot of land, basically just like Untermeyer Park. It wasn't a, it was a hospital. It was a place, I think, for mental tuberculosis. But anyway, it fell into abandonment, and the park became kind of abandoned. And by 1972, they were going to turn the parks into ball fields and a playground for the youth. And so the dome went right over here in this area, right over here. I do want to quickly just show on Google Earth so we can get a little bit more orientated to this. Whoops. What? I don't want to give that away. Yeah, we don't want to give away our movie.
Yeah, we have to dance soon to that music.
Oh, we'll dance. So what I just showed you was right here. This is PS24. This is the school. There's now a huge building called the Whitehall in the formerly wooded area, and this is Seton Park right here. Seton, the Elizabeth Seton Hospital that we saw, the building would have been right. Oh, sorry, I'm not even showing it to you. Duh. This is PS24 right here. Okay. This building, the Whitehall, again, I'll show the old picture in a set after we're done, was not in this picture. This is Independence Avenue that's been cut through the woods. And this is Seton Park right here, the modern Seton Park. That hospital would have been right about here. Okay. And the dome would have been right in here. So right across from the PS24, here's junior high school 141. This is where me and Nikolai went to school. So many people went to school there. And of course, this is all by our familiar playgrounds, the woods by the Hudson River. If we just go up a little bit, we have the Howell area. Here we have the Dodge Mansion, right in this area. Dodge Mansion is right around here. Right here is the Dodge Mansion. Okay, right around here, and so on and so forth.
Manny, two questions. The Seton Hospital was torn down?
Correct. And Seton Hospital, again, was right here. Everybody remember this bridge right here, because I'm going to go back to the original photograph to show you the, give me a second here. Here we go, share.
When you went to junior high school 141, was
Yeah.
it called that, or had it been changed to the David Stein Kingsbridge School?
No, it was no longer. It was not yet the David Stein School. That happened after I graduated. And 141 was in this area right here. Here's PS24. Here is Seton Park, and of course here is the hospital. And here is where that big white building would have been, called the Whitehall.
And was that your public school?
Yes, I went to PS24 and I went to 141, and both Nikolai and I went to both of those schools.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it is. That's where it was situated. And of course, the geodesic dome was invented by an architect inventor by Buckminster Fuller. And why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that, Eric?
Well, Buckminster Fuller came from Massachusetts. He was quite an amazing man. He was a cosmologist. He even acted. He did film. He was an architect. He was a polymath. He did so much in life. He even lost his inhibitions by being at a college where he met John Cage and the future film director Arthur Penn, and that made him lose his inhibitions, overcome depression, and he was involved with something called futurology, not to be confused with the great Italian movement of futurism, and yet he came up with developing this lightweight, shall we call it, dome, a geodesic dome, which has a peculiar structure, as you could see. This is just one sentence, because I'm not an architect, and it's rather new lingo for me, but keep that photo on and I'll just read this one sentence. A lightweight, a lightweight dome supported by a grid of short, rigid members dividing the surface into regular facets, each one of which strengthens the others. This method of construction was devised and the name coined by the American engineer Buckminster Fuller.
Well, first of all, I'm almost forced to say it. Rigid member. I got a rigid member for you right over here. But anyway, that's that's a little scatological, Eric.
Yes, it is.
All right, but here anyway. It would be incorrect to call Buckminster Fuller an architect. In fact, he was much more. But of course, the American inventor, theorist, and author did create stunning architectural structures, even if many of them weren't ultimately destined for living. His claim to fame is no doubt the geodesic dome, a spherical structure Fuller patented with an omnitriangulated surface that gave it super strength. The first was at the U.S. World Fair in Montreal. First was rendered, and so on and so forth. We don't have to go. We don't have to go into all of this. An original model of Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome house, intended to stand at 80 feet in diameter, from 1952, now on display at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Now, before we go any further,
Something. It was
yeah,
not. They said the first was in 1967.
no. I just the best known dome, one created at the U.S. Pavilion at the
Right.
67 World Fair in Montreal.
Because it was Robert Moses, famous in New York for highways and building throughout the land. Like the Robert Moses Highway. Robert Moses actually constructed a geodesic dome, the first in New York, I was told, at the World's Fair.
Interesting. And
It was at 1963, but he didn't want the city involved. And that's symbolic for our story later on in Riverdale.
of course, because the city was involved in that one. Tintiri is saying we have one in Oklahoma City, built in 1958, that was originally a bank. And Corky Goss says Epcot. It gets old. Now, of course,
Interesting that foresees the tragedy of this dome, because futurology was based on what they called 3 Ps: possible, probable, preferable, and wild cards, a low probability and high impact event. In other words, it's almost as if they foresaw that it would not be for certain everlasting, and that there would be almost, because I guess I'm reading into this because of what happens here in Riverdale, a certain tragedy.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, of course, here, geodesic domes, the reasons to build one, and this is from Off Grid World. Because these are decent structures, I guess, if you're building off grid. Geodesic structures save on building materials. Geodesic structures conserve energy for heating and cooling. Domes meet higher wind and snow load rating requirements. And that makes sense because of their shape. But I can't help but wonder, Eric, about what the fascination is with these elites, because you just mentioned Buckminster Fuller, right? Hanging out with John Cage.
Mm-hmm.
John Cage was absolute crap. I mean, let's just face it. He was another one of these modern musique concrete musicians that was garbage, who was heavily promoted, much like Jackson Pollock, heavily promoted by the system as some sort of genius. And all he did was dumb down music. So it's
And
weird that,
yeah, everybody's made to intellectualize that it's listen, never before. It's superior to Beethoven or the equal.
it was crap. It was absolute garbage. And to this day, there's people out there, oh, John Cage, and they take him so seriously. I was in the classical music world for many years of my life before I got into gardening. I was in the classical music world in New York City. I've never met more people who were so intellectually challenged and had no idea about how and thought they were the smartest people on earth. But one of the things that makes me always sort of stink eye at these people, Eric, is that they have so much money, right?
Mm-hmm.
These elitists, right? Like, now I don't want to badmouth the elitists of Riverdale, but Riverdale Neighborhood House was started by copper mining money. These people were uber rich, trillionaires, comparatively speaking, of our money wise of our time. These people lived in huge mansions built of the most hewn stone there was. But look at the structures that they're proposing for humanity, right? Like this Dymaxion house, which was another Buckminster Fuller house, right? Forward thinking approach, design, which promised revolving dresser drawers, a fine mist shower that reduced consumption, wind powered air conditioning. They're pulling the same stuff today with their tiny house crap. You're going to eat bugs and like it. You're going to own nothing. We're going to take away all the good stuff for you. You're going to live in a 20-foot square foot pod and eat bugs.
Go ahead and eat bugs and see what diseases you get, because your immune system is different from theirs. That sounds funny. Now you take that structure you just showed. That's that's the exact opposite of, let's say, Frank Lloyd Wright, who built according to the environment and how to live and properly see the sunlight coming in, to be able to look outside and see the beauty of life. Now, I just have to say this. This has to do with the elites financing this. How many of these financial elites really understood what they were financing? Because you said John Cage. With him, you mentioned Jackson Pollock. My true crime writer friend Sandra London, who is a painter and a poet also, a real one, said Jackson Pollock was really a classical painter.
Mm-hmm.
He was following the masters, and suddenly he turns and he starts doing this new type of art, throwing things all over the canvas, walking on top of it, and with his shoes, his boots. And what mind was behind it? We do know from even a British documentary about the intelligence services using these modern artists, the negative art, for a purpose of psychological manipulation. It's known.
Right, and it also does the added benefit of destroying culture and making people weaker and fracturing the population into little subgroups that then argue with each other rather than keep their eyes on the real prize, which is the enemy that's oppressing us all. I mean, let's just face it. But these. Whoops, sorry, don't want to get you guys too excited there. I keep on pressing.
You want to dance? Go on.
I want to dance. I want to
dance with that.
When you guys hear this funky wah wah later, you're gonna love it. But anyway, this is a nice little geodesic dome. I mean, look, they could be nice, they could be very very pleasant, and but I would imagine you would need a lot of money to build something like this, regardless.
That looks like a fairy tale type dome, though, doesn't it? There's something fairy tale-ish about it. There's a style to it. It seems as if somebody had an image of some, like from maybe the early silent film version or something of The Wizard of Oz or German expression. It's rather nice. And I love that photo that Gavila did. It looks like a sepia at night, but taken from a silent film.
Yeah, it's a great photo. We gotta find out. So anyway, here's an article from the New York Times, Tuesday, December 19th, 1972. Now, this, of course, speaks to the privilege of the Riverdale community and, of course, the connections that the brainchild of the dome had. Because if this was done down at, say, like the Fordham Road Community Center, right, that had no funding and no elite backing, they would have never have written about it in the New York Times. I know a thing or two about media and about how stories are plugged and presented and embedded in the media. This story was put in here by someone in Riverdale who had connections at the New York Times to get this article written, because it's not worthy of an article in the New York Times. So this, of course, speaks to in my opinion, the elite nature and the connections of this place that started it. But anyway, no youth center in Spite and Dibble, so youngsters construct their own. So this is a great article giving you guys the mainstream history of the dome. But it's good to start from here. Eric, if you can kill that.
Yeah, two things. Maybe people should know. They're not from around here. Spiet and Dievel is a Dutch name meaning almost sputtering forth the devil.
Yeah, let me get back to
I want to ask you something though. Why do you say that? Why do you say that Son of a bitch.
Why do I say what?
Why do you say that it wasn't worthy? Son of a. Hello? Son of a.
All right, just turn the ringer off, please.
Yeah, I gotta. Son of a bitch. Please, I can't answer now. Stop calling back. I'll call you, whoever you are, back later.
Eric, we're on the air. We can't do this.
I know it's a wrong number, but
All
she
right.
won't
So
give up. I
listen.
don't know who she is.
So
Why
real quick,
was it not
here's
worthy for the New York Times, Manny?
what'd you say?
Why was it not worthy for the New York Times?
No, I'm just saying if the dome had been built in like the South Bronx where there were no politically active people, if it was just local people building a dome for their youth, it made it into the New York Times. It made it into the New York Times because this was happening in Riverdale. Now, you mentioned Spite and Dival. Okay, I just want to let people know that that is a part of Riverdale. Riverdale is this section of the Bronx right here. Okay, from where I'm going up here all the way down to the Hudson River, Harlem River Canal right here. It's broken into North Riverdale, this section up here, South Riverdale, which is where I grew up. I grew up in this building right here, and Spite and Dival, which means in spite of the devil. And it was named that because this channel, which was not as big in those years, but still, this was a very dangerous part with the currents of the river and the estuary. And so crossing this, you took your life in your hands. And so they called it in Dutch, Spite and Dival. And it does have a very long and rich history. So again, real quick, the dome would have been, I turned the thing around. Here's PS24 here. The dome would have been right in here. And this is Seton Park. And of course, here's the famous Hudson River and so on and so forth. So let's get back to our article, and let's just read you guys the article. So, no youth center in Spite and Dival, so youngsters construct their own, by John L. Hess. It is hardly the most elegant of Buckminster Fuller's brainchildren, but the young people of Spite and Dival have their own center now, and they built it themselves. About 50 were in the dome the other night, some rehearsing a structured improvisation of a Christmas playlet, others waiting to jam some rock, and all of them rapping and relating like anything. Now, before we go any further, listen to that language. Rapping and relating. It sounds like a hippie is writing this. Like it's not even like proper journalism. They're using counterculture terms of the day.
And the rapping then, as you even corrected me, because I was thinking rap, and I had forgotten rap is a way of speaking and getting on with things back then.
Right, exactly. So I don't know, just this is a very, very whoever wrote this was working very hand in hand with
it said.
Right. So looking on with suppressed pride was red-bearded Pizer Edelsack, who, when complimented on the turnout, grumbled, quote, "I prefer to work with fewer people. I'm not into mass numbers at all," unquote. Mr. Edelsack, 30 years old, is a street worker of the Riverdale Neighborhood House. That is, he was until he and his people worked themselves off the street. A couple of years ago, Mr. Edelsack was assigned to work with the youth of Spite and Dival, a white middle-class sector of the Bronx where there were and are serious problems with drugs and drinking and virtually no after-school facilities. There was talk of opening a coffee house and a storefront, but rents were too high. Building a conventional center was out of the question financially. Now, Eric, the families financing this were of the highest copper mining families imaginable. You're telling me there was no money to rent
It wasn't just the Dodges, the Perkins, the Delafields. I don't know if the Plimptons had anything to do with it. The Gunts, the Wileys, the Morgenthau. I don't know who actually put it in. It seems to be directly the line of the Dodges.
The Dodges, yeah. Well, I think we can mainly say the Dodges because the Dodges started the Riverdale Neighborhood House. But I don't understand how there was no money, because you had the richest people on earth who were backing this project. All right, but that's just one question that it's going to come up with many about this dome.
Well, one of the monetary factors is that they were not allowed to charge anything for the shows they put on.
Well, let's get to that later. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
So how it began. Quote, I've been reading the Dome book, Mr. Edelsack said. It said we could build this for $900. So our first budget was $900 to allow for contingencies. Our second budget was $5,000. Our third was $10,000 because we learned about city standards and so on. Quote, nonetheless, the city gave a site in Seton Park at West 235th Street. Neighborhood architects gave their services, dealers donated much of the material, and the community raised the rest. The brush was cleared last August, and nearly every day since then, boy and girl volunteers have pitched in learning as they worked. Quote, that was the best part, a girl said nostalgically. There was some fear in the community that the Dome would be a drug center. Mr. Edelsack confided. A parents group even asked the Riverdale Neighborhood House to assign the funds collected for the Dome to a new evening gym program. Town meetings. They did open the school, he said, but they kick out kids who are stoned. All they want is basketball. There's a real tendency in our community to deny problems exist. Young people at the Dome did not deny that these problems existed. Quote, our rules are there's no drugs and no drinking here. If somebody smokes a joint outside, we ask them to leave the area, unquote. Rules are adopted at, quote, town meetings, unquote. When obscenity appears among the graffiti on the inner wall, it was decided after serious discussion to cover them with a black mural identified as a caterpillar, pending a proper paint job. The Dome project is contagious. Adjoining the site, public school children are building themselves a playground. So it just ends there, oddly enough.
There's evidently a moral foundation, though. No narcotics, no vulgarities.
Right, but then it ends up pretty quickly, as we're going to find out, guys, in our story. It ends up being a haven for druggies, LSD, pot, potentially heroin. We're not sure. But one of the reasons why it got torn down and arsoned and fell into ignominy was because it quickly turned into a druggie heaven. And what's weird is that it was started to curb the drug problem. So not really something that they achieved, Eric.
Well, I wonder if subconsciously, I mean, it's almost as if it's like a spell cast upon it, because one of the main themes behind this mentality that influenced Buckminster Fuller is uncertainty that it would continue and it would have a high successful rate. The word is uncertainty.
Right.
It's very tragic here, by the way, uncertainty. And that coincides with the type of music that John Cage did. There's nothing certain. It's all over the place.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
By the way, I want to apologize to everybody for the phone thing. It was a woman who kept phoning, and she says, I got the wrong number. Well, why are you phoning me for? Anyway.
So, all right. So listen, we're going to get into in future shows all of the social issues of the Dome and the people of the Dome and the problems that ended up at the Dome, the good stuff that happened at the Dome too. We're not just going for the salacious. We've been speaking to people who, honestly, Eric, you and I, you can attest to this.
Oh God.
Who think that it was one of the greatest things that ever happened.
Yeah. Well, they had hope. They had hope because when the counterculture comes, I'm not conspiratorial. This is a fact. I'm going to put myself on the line, and I think you agree with me. Someone in this country wanted narcotics to permeate our society.
I agree with that statement 1,000,000%.
There have always been dope fiends, and that's not a bad term because you're a fiend when you take drugs, and the first victim of the fiend is yourself. But they make you think you're doing something that is fantastic, mystical, and it's not. In this period, I was told by one of the people I'll mention later, there was also LSD, and that LSD was corrupted LSD, made in London, tons of it by the Orange Revolution. This was planned. I'm sorry, not the Dome, but to destroy the youth. One thing about the youth that John Hess mentions in the New York Times article is that a person I interviewed, who we will name later, told me it was all youth from all walks of life, from the very wealthy adolescent to the people who were underprivileged, poor, all races, all religions, all backgrounds.
Yes, and one of the main things about the dome, of course, was that it started because there was a bunch of a bunch of drugged out kids hanging out at a place called the Monument, which was in central Riverdale, and also a street called Johnson Avenue. And so they wanted to get these kids off the street and give them a place that they could call their own. Um, but it doesn't seem like the drug problem was lessened any. They didn't solve the drug problem. They just took all the druggies and put them into this isolated spot in the middle of the woods in Riverdale, where they could now hang out with each other, away from all the prying eyes of the local adults, and of course also be hanging out with these social workers from the Riverdale Neighborhood House, many of which we're finding out were psychiatrists. So there was all sorts of psychiatrists
Many of
involved in this project as well. So kind of like you guys can probably glean where we're going with this, where we're kind of what we're kind of hypothesizing. We don't have any conclusions. We know a little bit more about the dome than you guys out there, but we are still searching, of course. But my working hypothesis about the dome is that it might have been a social experiment of some sort, not necessarily a Milgram type experiment, but some sort of social experiment run by psychiatrists. And the ultimate point wasn't to even keep the dome as a living, breathing structure. It was just to build it. And that was the point. And then to run experiments with the kids with certain ideologies that we're going to get into later in our not in today's discussion, but in future discussions. So anyway, Eric, I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves. So let's take a look.
You can't help but get ahead of yourself because of the historical concurrency of everything. Riverdale is one example. Panic in Needle Park. When I lived in Rome, there was even right near Vatican City, there was a section where the seminarians from America said, we call that Needle Park. It seems to be something planned everywhere. And today, has it lessened? No, we have the opioid epidemic in cities and even small Western towns.
True. All right. So before we get into all that, let's look at The Dome People by Ruth Rea Howell. And of course, photographs by Arlene Strong. And of course, Arlene Strong was also Ruth Rea Howell's photographer for A Crack in the Pavement. Ruth Rea Howell, photographs by Arlene Strong. So these two were very, very close, at least working partners. And these books were printed by a publishing house called Athenaeum Press, which is a sub category of Simon and Schuster. Eric, you gotta, this has got to stop.
I know.
So can you turn the ringer off?
I disattached the phone.
Okay, good.
I hope.
Okay, so Simon and Schuster put these books out. And of course, Ruth Rea Howell, through her social connections, of course, she got to deal with Simon and Schuster. I mean, Alfred Hunt Howell was, one of the most eminent people, in all of New York City, to be quite honest. So let's take a look at The Dome People, a little bit more of this book here, and we'll go through it. And then, of course, we will look at the movie. So now, of course, Parking in the Rea. It's my contention that Ruth Rea Howell is equal, if not higher, on the social scale than even her husband, Alfred Hunt Howell. Even though he comes from the Hunt family of Bethlehem Steel and shipbuilders, Eric, Ruth Rea Howell comes from the Dodge family. And the Dodge family, in my opinion, was the top families in New York, in the United States. So Ruth Rea Howell, married to Alfred Howell, Pittsburgh girl, becomes bride of New Yorker at summer home of her parents. She is the granddaughter of Mrs. Cleveland H. Dodge, bridegroom, son of banker.
And the man who married them was from the Kerr family.
Right, and the Kerr family later becomes big in the American University of Beirut up till 1984 when Malcolm Kerr gets assassinated.
And the man who replaces Malcolm Kerr is Dr. Calvin Plimpton.
Correct. All of these people from Riverdale. So announcement has been made. Ruth Rea, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. James Child Rea of Pittsburgh, to Alfred Hunt Howell, son of Mr. Okay, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to go through all of that. The bride, a granddaughter of Mrs. Cleveland H. Dodge of Riverdale on Hudson, this city, and the late Mr. Dodge and of Mr. William Holdership Rea of Pittsburgh, and the late Mr. Rea, Mrs. Mary. So these are the bride whose mother is the former Miss Julia Dodge, was introduced to society. So here we have these debutantes: Cleveland Dodge, Johnson Garrett of Baltimore, former Miss Margaret Dodge, graduated from Vassar. And her husband, of course, belongs to Squadron A, Citibank Farmers Trust. His father is the vice president of the Guaranteed Trust Company of New York. And so we did a lot more of these genealogical connections on our Alfred Hunt Howell series.
Mm-hmm.
But Ruth Rea Howell was a heavy duty blue blood American, landed gentry, debutante, major player in the uber elite of the United States.
Involved herself in many children's affairs.
Correct. She was all about children. She ran these children's alternative learning schools, experimental nursery schools, and daycare centers. And of course, all of her books were children's books, essentially, including The Dome People was written basically for children, as we'll see. So, of course, Ruth Rea Howell just wrote the book, The Dome People. She wasn't, we don't know whether she was necessarily involved in the project itself, but we do know two people who were, Eric.
Oh, yes.
This man right here, Pizer Edelsack.
The mind behind the dome.
So this is the mind behind the dome, okay? Pizer Edelsack, who died in 2014. He was a colleague of Project Find, okay? Which I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but his involvement with Sophie Davis grew from his service as assistant professor of Albert Einstein College of Medicine and field education coordinator at the Department of Social Medicine at Montefiore Medical Center. So social work, psychiatry, social work.
And mental health.
Right. He was involved in mental health. Mr. Edelsack was also a board member and former board chairman of the Charles B. Wang Community Health Center. Earlier in his career, he was the principal of the Alternative Learning Space. Okay. So this is the mid-70s now.
That's subsequent to the dome. He
right.
goes and he's made the principal there.
Correct. As soon as the Dome project ends, he ends up at the Alternative Learning Space, a middle school for troubled students in the Bronx. As a youth worker for Riverdale Neighborhood House, also in the Bronx, he directed teens in building the first geodesic dome sanctioned by the New York Department of Buildings. Born in Los Angeles in 1943, he graduated from UCLA before joining the Peace Corps, working with farmers and villagers in a remote corner of India. So here's Pizer Edelsack a few years before he died. Looks like what I think he is, a very uber elite power player in New York social circles. Somehow or other, this man was plucked from obscurity, brought to the uber elite Riverdale Neighborhood House, where he started this project called the Dome, and then just leaves the Dome and starts Alternative Learning Space, right? What qualifications did he have for that? I would like to know, as an educator and as a pedagogist.
He's brought to Riverdale through a grant where he deals with mental health at the Riverdale Neighborhood House, and he has an office of his own. Now, what the connection is, because he did not live in Bronx County, he lived in New York County, which is Manhattan.
Correct. He lived in the financial district. He lived down on Wall Street, interestingly enough, which is about as far as you can get from Riverdale as you can in Manhattan.
I think that was his last home, but the person who was most gracious, whom I interviewed, said that he was first at Riverside.
Oh, Riverside Drive on the Upper West Side.
On the Upper West Side.
Okay.
So lastly, he goes, I believe, if he did go with his wife, if that's where he ended his life 9 years ago, it's down in the Wall Street area.
Right.
And a fantastic career. He goes from job to job to job. He's very, very fortunate with the positions that he gets. You know,
Exactly. So, but let's take a look at Pizer Edelsack when he was building the dome, because the Pizer Edelsack you see here is the Pizer Edelsack you see here.
hmm
So now, of course, this is director Scott Redman, which is the guy over here who's smoking a cigarette,
he
and
was
producer Pizer Edelsack watch a rehearsal of Pieces, which previews at the Neighborhood House beginning Friday, January 21st. So this is the Pizer Edelsack that was directing the children at the dome.
at the Dome, and the director Scott Redman was the director of the plays,
At
and
the dome.
at the Dome, and he was considered one of the major important figures there after Pizer Edelsack, middle name Sherman, Pizer Sherman Edelsack, and the man who initially was as important as Edelsack as far as being the architect of it, uh,
Richie Stein.
Richard Stein, who became the owner when his father had several heart attacks of the Riverdale Press, and he became the publisher of it, the top, man in charge business wise to
Correct.
maintain it. Now, let me just say this: that Richard Stein's father, David Stein, actually was the one who was appreciated by the elite families when he moved to Riverdale, and he's responsible with the success of the Riverdale Press of creating what you could call Riverdale a town, putting
Right.
all of the sections and neighborhoods of Riverdale into one. Riverdale, the town in Bronx County.
Correct. Exactly. And people from Riverdale don't even, a lot of them don't even consider that they live in the Bronx. They say Riverdale, and the Bronx
Mhm.
isn't even. So of course, here's Richie Stein. He was the architect of the dome, and he talks about it here. Way back in 1971, I was the first to convince the New York City Building Department to approve the construction of a geodesic dome, one built entirely by teenage volunteers on an overgrown and rubble-strewn Bronx lot. So Pizer Edelsack, this guy Scott Redman, of course, is now dead of a heroin overdose.
It was
He
heroin, not,
it,
not cancer, or both.
no, I was told that he OD'd, and
Mhm,
if I'm wrong about that, someone will correct me. But I was told by two different people that he OD'd on
mhm.
heroin. So member of the drugged out youth community here, and here's Pizer behind him with his arm on him and everything, and I'll just leave that picture there for people to look at. All right, so let's take a look at some of the pictures of the dome. So, of course, here's the inset here, reinforced binding. By the way, these are very high quality books. By the way, this book is from 1972, and it's like brand new. It's like the pages are amazing. So we don't have to read all of this. The pictures are important. So here's a building. Now this is Tom. This is a guy that you and I have spoken to.
Tom Martin, yes. In fact, Richard Stein told me that Tom Martin was quite physically strong and fit, which is why he saved his life by going into judo. Judo gave him a certain centering. Yeah, but Tom was there. He was a major figure as a worker, and one who really was intensely involved in the dome for its success and also for his own life.
Right. Tom is a very interesting character. We have a lot of I did an hour and a half with him roughly on video, and we're going to cut that up and bring you some of the best stuff. And this guy was an intimate part of building the dome, and he called himself a PIT, a Pizer in training. So, of course, here's The Dome People by Ruth Howell, photographs by Arlene Strong, Athenium, 1974. And you can still find copies of this online. And, for Dorothy and Sam, oh my God. It says Sam. Guilty.
You know what's interesting? She has her name as the authoress inside as Ruth Howell, but on the front dust cover, doesn't it say Ruth? She has her maiden name also, Ruth Rea
Where?
Howell.
No, Ruth Rea is not nowhere on at all on this.
Oh,
She
really? hmm
she she only uses Howell.
hmm
So, of course, here's the table of contents, plans, angles. We don't need to go through all of this. The pictures are what's important. So, of course, the geodesic dome, what it was supposed to look like. So, plans, angles, frustrations, and a start. There are many ways to enclose a space for living and working. 4 walls, 4 corners, and a roof will do it. An igloo will do it, and so will a teepee. In the middle of the 20th century, an American, Buckminster Fuller, invented a new way and named it a geodesic dome. 20 years later, a group of teenagers who lived at the edge of a large city decided they wanted to build such a dome. For months, they had looked for a building they could rent for a meeting place, but they couldn't find one that they could afford. Then their leader, a man who had some experience with building, had an inspiration. Why not build our own place, he asked. We should be able to do it relatively cheaply because we could do all the work ourselves. He had 2 friends, he said, who had just graduated from architectural school, and they recommended a geodesic dome for unskilled builders. So they're talking about Pizer Edelsack and Richie Stein right here.
Right. And Pizer Edelsack got the idea from a book that's called The Dome.
The Dome book. The teenagers liked the idea, both because a dome would look entirely different from any other building in their neighborhood, and also because they knew that if they built their own place, they could make their own decisions about its use. So they're already starting to talk about collectivism here, Eric, right? This is tinges of collectivism. Once the decision to build was made, the group had to find some land. They were fortunate when the city parks department allowed them to use a small corner of undeveloped park property. Securing a building permit was much more difficult. For the whole month of July, several of the group went to the county building permit office every day, for every city has rules to protect its citizens from unsafe or unhealthy construction, and the building department enforces these rules. There, the group showed their plans, answered questions, and filled out forms, filled out more forms, and answered more questions. They were asked to wait, so they waited. But they began to wonder if geodesic domes could be built only on desert islands. The men in the buildings department had never seen such plans before, and they were afraid the building would not stand up. One of the frustrated teenagers described the problem. Quote, "A dome is sort of a symbol of a different way of doing things. Because it's not rectilinear, it's suspect. There's never been a building like it in this county in history," unquote. The architects and the dome people knew of the basic structural integrity of Fuller Geodesics domes, but the buildings department men acted as if they never heard of him. So she's already setting up the city as like the enemy here, right? Even though these people owned the city, really. I mean, they own, Anyway, Bucky Fuller's domes are built on a different principle from any other domes in the world. The domes of St. Peter's in Rome and the Capitol building in Washington are dramatic ways of covering large open spaces in rectangular buildings with rounded tops. But a Fuller dome is the building. It rises directly from the floor, and it requires less material to enclose a space than anything else that has ever been invented. A geodesic dome is part of a sphere made up of 20 large equilateral triangles. The sphere is not smooth like a grapefruit. Rather, it has many surfaces because each of the 20 triangles is constructed of 9 smaller ones. Fuller called his sphere an icosahedron, and its strength depends on the use of triangles. Unless the corners of a square are specially strengthened to make them absolutely rigid, they will bend and the square will wobble and lose its shape. But the triangle cannot get out of shape. To test this principle, take 3 ice cream sticks, pin 2 of them together, and you will see that the angle you have made swivels freely. Now pin the unattached ends of the sticks to the third to make a triangle. None of the angles moves at all, but add a 4th stick, making a square, and see what happens. The dome people knew all these facts, and they also knew how many teenagers in their part of the city would use the dome if it were built, so they never gave up at the building office, and finally they received their permit. But by then it was a month later than they expected to start working. It was August, and the dome had to be ready for winter by the first hard freeze in November. The original planners, realized they needed lots and lots of help, and they soon got it in the form of younger boys and girls. Some of them heard about the dome from their older sisters and brothers. Others just found it when they were riding around on their bikes trying to cool off on scorching afternoons. There, they were excited to find out that they could work too, and they told their friends about it. Most of them had never built anything larger than a snow fort before, but they learned as they worked. And this is our last paragraph. In the first August issue, the local newspaper, that must be the Riverdale Press, printed an article about the dome asking for help, and older people began to help too. Some of them stopped by every day to leave sandwiches and cookies and soft drinks. A utility company contributed used telephone poles and hard hats. A man in the construction business became interested. Through his kindness, the Dome people were able to get some of the materials they needed at the site of a skyscraper which was being built downtown. The man himself often visited and shared his knowledge of the building. The Dome was underway at last. Um, just one thing before I continue. There's a lot of commas in this text that don't need to be there. So the editing of this book was horrible.
Well, what I'd like to say is this, though, before you go on.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, in the local newspaper, if it was indeed most likely the Riverdale Press, how people also became new of this, how the information was diffused, is that, as Richard Stein told me, Pisa Edelsack would go with press releases to the
Right.
Riverdale Press and say, listen, I've written these. Will you please publish them? And David Stein liked him, and he had his son Richard be friends with him. In fact, he gave his son $5. He says, take him to dinner. You're going to like this guy. And that's how they became close friends. Now, notice that it mentions teenagers and younger children already being involved in some type of social community to help them get out of the dregs they were in before the dome is built. They took some of the children, Richie Stein and Pisa Edelsack, to Manhattan, where Buckminster Fuller put a show on in a theater.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, about the geodesic dome. And they were amazed that this man, who had been inhibited in life and broke his inhibition by being with Arthur Penn and John Cage at a college university, even was dancing to show them something about a gyroscope going round and round and round. And it was so fulfilling and exciting that it even fulfilled them all the more to go forward with this project by seeing the man himself on stage.
Cool. Well, listen, these guys got so into it that they actually slept overnight. Tents were erected at the site of the dome, and this is in Seton Park, and this is in the exact same spot where I was in my walk and talk, which I just put up yesterday or 2 days ago, I forget exactly. But yeah, the adults and the children would sleep in these tents together. We have gotten word that Pizer Edelsack himself would sleep out with the kids at night, overnight in these tents. We don't know how many times he did that. We don't know how regular that was, but we did get word that he most likely was there sleeping with the kids overnight. But the kids would stay in these tents, and us, because they needed to protect the site from theft. I don't know what they would have done if if mobsters came and wanted to steal stuff, but it never happened. And so it became like a campsite. It became a campsite for months in the middle of the city here, in that Seton Park area, where children would well, as far as I know and can tell, where children would stay with older teenagers and people in their 20s overnight in these tents.
It reminds me of the late 60s and early 70s. The ideals that we had, regardless of politics, the tie-dye shirts, that looks like, I could imagine some youth saying, hey, we're like the people out west going and venturing across the country in the covered wagons. What an adventure. I could see how children would be enthusiastic to be a part of this.
Yeah, and of course here they have doing this, and listen, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but this is kind of a weird picture to me, with this kid sitting on this phallic symbol here, and then them cutting it and essentially circumcising it.
Oh.
And also, why not use a chainsaw? Like, the chainsaw would be much better at cutting this than this contraption here. It makes no sense. And then you have some.
If there had been a chainsaw, I would have run away. Those things freak me out. I don't even want to be the one holding it.
Right, but you can see here that you have young kids, as young as like 9 or 10, hanging out with people in their 20s, right? Maybe teenagers here. This was maybe 16 years old or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so all age groups were hanging out at this thing, working together, okay? In the middle of the woods, essentially. Even though it was an urban environment, it was still Riverdale. It was the middle of the woods. And this picture illustrates that even more. Again. I believe that's Tom.
Yeah, Fit Tom.
Look at that. Look at that.
Artist.
Right, and of course, Arlene Strong took this picture of him here in all his glory. I mean, beautiful body. Look at that amazing body he's got. We got to talk to him about that. We got to see if he still looks like that underneath. But here's Tom Martin, of course, with two young kids, and I guess they were making sand or making concrete. I'm not quite sure what the hell they were doing.
Mm-mm-mm.
And here's Tom again, and just building this dome. They set in these light poles and they concreted them into the ground.
It's actually quite admirable when you look at what it looks like there in those photos and what was finally uh, built.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on paper, this is a great thing. Okay, taking kids who are on drugs, marginalized kids, youth on the margins, corralling them into an area where they could put that energy to use on positive things, architectural pursuits. It's amazing on paper.
Mm-hmm. And later on, our friend for the architecture comes in, Alfonso Gavila, for the,
Right.
and I'll tell you how that happens, but go forward.
So here is, of course, Pizer Edelsack and Tom Martin right here. And of course, Tom, you guys can see a picture of Tom. I did a trailer for for the Dome where I showed a guy in like a basement and we were talking. That's this guy right here, Tom. And so there's Pizer. So
Mm-hmm.
Pizer was there working on this with the kids. He was into it. He was involving himself with all the youth here. Here they are leveling something out. Now, remember when Alphonse told us that there were two people from Albany who would come in every day to work? And
Right.
they were psychiatrists?
Yeah.
I think this is them. And the reason why I'm saying that, I could be totally wrong, but the reason why I think that is because, first of all, look how clean they are. This was a photo op. These people were not working. I mean,
Mm.
do you agree? Do you see how clean they are? Not a mark on their bodies, not a stain
Yes,
on their shirt.
I could see what you mean. Or they could have been the youth from upper class families.
Maybe, but I see a Y here. I'm not quite sure what that is. We gotta identify these two because Alphonse told us that there were two people who would drive from Albany, New York. That's 3.5 hours away. They
Every
would
day.
drive. They would drive every day, and they were social. They were psychiatrists.
They must have been doing a study. They had
Right.
been doing a study and they figured, let's get our hands involved in this while we, a good way to study is to work with the people we're studying.
Exactly. Now, I wonder what the like to me it seems like there were many reasons for this dome. The reasons stated on paper, but I am curious about the hidden occult meanings and the hidden occult. And I'm not using occult as to mean satanic worshiping. I'm using the hidden reasons for this. Was this a social experiment? Was this a psychiatric experiment? Were these kids unwitting participants in some sort of ideological indoctrination? We don't know.
Further, let me take it further. Was it not even imagined to be like that by Pisa Edelsack, if that was the case? If it was the case, as you say.
Right. Or was Pizer Edelsack the brainchild behind all of this, including the psychiatric and social experiments going on? If there were, again, we are just hypothesizing. We don't have any proof. We are not conspiratard maniacs. And we don't subscribe to the notion of research where just because someone has a name that's related to someone else, that means they're guilty of something. We're doing this extremely meticulously, but we are coming at it from the perspective of studiers of the elite, studiers of social engineering programs, studiers of the conspiracy world, and so on and so forth.
Now they're building the roof right there, right?
No, they're building the base, the floor.
That's the base. Okay.
And look at the little kids they had here, right? Like they had little children, not they were more than toddlers. These are about 5 years old, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Now I doubt the 5 years old hung out at night, but
No,
certainly the teenagers were.
yeah, the teenagers. I don't think they would allow little children there. And I don't think the community would have allowed that unless the parents were there with them. But
Right. And here we have a girl leveling out. She, kind of looks like she's learning as she goes. Now, I want to read this because it's just weird writing. So, one morning when the frame was nearly finished, all work stopped momentarily because the electric company sent one of its cherry picker trucks so the dome people could get a bird's eye view of the floor. The cherry picker hoisted two photographers up 50 feet to take pictures of the frame and its wonderful patterns of lines and angles. Meanwhile, one boy took time out to work on a chess problem in the shade. It's such a weird juxtaposition there. Like, is this like her take on modern jazz writing? Like, is this like abstract writing? Like, I can't imagine, like, why go from the cherry picker to like, here's a boy doing a chess problem in the shade. It's like, so I can't describe exactly
well,
explain why that bothers me.
really,
Yeah, but it bothers me. I don't know why that bothers me.
well, there's probably a reason. You probably see something.
Like a
eh,
fakeness to it.
There's a you know above and below. There's this contrast of what's above and what's below. But the boy is doing a chess problem.
Right.
That
And is
it's interesting that he's playing chess, which is a very, very psychological game.
right. And he's also playing it alone, or unless somebody is playing it with him and comes back. But like, were they just like letting kids hang out in the middle of a construction site playing chess? I mean, it just seems so weird.
Well, with the imagination, this is my perspective, you could say that working on a chessboard and all the complications of the movements are like the dome eventually.
Good point. Great point. So I think this is our man Tom again hammering in, and of course this kid right here got messaged me on Facebook saying that he, like, that's me. So people are starting to get involved in with this project that Eric and I are doing. People
Did
are
you give
into.
his name? I didn't.
Yeah, I'm trying to get all these people for future shows.
Oh, great, great.
Now, of
Um,
course, here's right across the street playing in the thing, and of course, again, here you see, like, now this could be a father, this could be a parent, but look at just the age differences of all the people hanging out together. Like, I didn't hang out with kids this age when I was 10 years old. I didn't hang out with 20-year-olds, like, it just wasn't something that I did. So
well,
anyway,
I imagine I would be interested to know if the little children who were there were children who were not looked after by their parents, and there was the risk of becoming criminals, delinquents, and even addicts.
and it's possible, but the thing that we all got to remember is that this is Riverdale. This was a cushy community. This was not a poor community where these kids were like going to be corralled into the prison industrial complex. These were upper middle class kids who were all destined to become mostly good office drones, doctors, lawyers, dentists, professors, and so on and so forth. So there's that. And of course, in the building of this dome, these kids were so messed up that they they spent an entire like week making like screwing up. So they end up putting the dome together, and they don't realize that they're all putting it together wrong, and they're up here and they're putting it together, and it comes out all lopsided, right? So then they had to actually take it apart at a certain level and rebuild it. But the structure was starting to come together right there. And here's some more pictures, which I found a little, I don't know, odd.
Now, we were told by Tom that young lady was someone. Uh,
Yeah, this is Ishel Gruenbaum, and we are in touch with her. I find it odd that this picture was taken, that you could, I don't know, kind of see up her shorts there. I mean, I don't know. An editor had to look at this and approve this photograph. I wouldn't have approved that photograph. I don't understand that.
are you a Calvinist?
I'm just a heavily spiritually healthy person.
I know, I'm joking with you.
So anyway, here we have the kids working at night, which goes against all like safety and health and safety regulations. These
Mhm.
kids are hanging out in the middle of pitch black darkness on these
Wearing hard hats.
yeah, wearing hard hats, but big deal, right? What if they fall off of one of these things, right? So they're working in the middle of the night, they're screwing up. But they're having a good time. I mean, this was the 70s after all. This would never happen now. But
That's the famous photo that's, I think, on the dust jacket, right?
no, this is one of these is the one, and we'll see it in a second. So it looks like the older kids were and the adults were, hanging out at the top of this thing. So
Well, mhm.
now it's starting to come together. You were saying, Eric?
It's at this point, we don't know when it's starting to come together, as you say, that we have, according to what Mr. Richard Lee Stein told me, where Pizer, being a very friendly man who would talk to all walks of life, meets a motorcyclist who is known as a social worker or a community worker, Alphonse Gavila. And he
Right.
notices how Alphonse Gavila works with fiberglassing together certain parts of a motorcycle. He could put motorcycles together, like a cousin Stephen of mine in Rhode Island. He would build them also. And he asks him to join because he wanted that fiberglassing work
Insulation.
to
Right.
be used with the construction of the dome. So that's the first appearance we know of
Of
from
Alphonse Gavila.
Alphonse Gavila.
Right, who we will be bringing on our airwaves in future shows, by the way. Very interesting man. He was a motorcycle. He even has Untermeyer Park stories. We're fine. Yeah, Eric, one thing that's crazy about this is that, and you can attest to this, we've already have 2 Untermeyer Park stories. Which
Oh, God, yes.
yeah,
Untermeyer Park and Gardens. And in fact, you can't, that's why I like that you kept the title for this iteration, The Son of Sam Truth, because we're brought to this story by studying the death of Alfred Hunt Howell Sr., whom someone alluded to as Mr. Real Estate, but there's no proof. And you find that book by his wife, and you're brought back to the Dome Project.
right, exactly. And but Alphonse Gavila, who left New York in 1976, told us about some Untermeyer Park witnessing things that he witnessed there in the early 70s. And we were on the phone yesterday with Tom Martin, who we've showed his picture a few times already in this. I just asked him straight up, "Did you ever go to Untermeyer Park?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, oh that was crazy." And then he had to go, so we didn't hear the story, but we're gonna get that from him the next time. So it's interesting, the Spuyten Duyvil, Riverdale, Dome, Untermeyer Park connections that we're already making. And Alphonse Gavila was a motorcycle dude who was hanging out in Untermeyer Park and the Dome. Not making any accusations there. By all accounts, he was not one of these hardcore motorcycle gang members. In fact, he didn't like that life at all. But
In fact,
he
he
did.
left a group of motorcyclists that he frequented because they wanted to go bad, and he immediately said, "That's it," and he left.
Right, exactly. So here they are, and here's Pizer. He makes his appearance here at the end, putting up the last few panels. I believe that's Tom. So Pizer and Tom were very close. And here's a kid, I guess, putting on the last of the few things here. And then once it was built, of course, they caulked it. Whoops, sorry. They started caulking it. And of course, so here's the caulking and beautiful, great 70s hairstyle. And that's what it looks like caulked. And of course, it already started to become a hangout right away. There were kids hanging out in there right away, even before it was finished. And, here's Tom Martin again, laying concrete right here. And they're laying the concrete down, and they got these pretty girls who are pouring concrete and so on and so forth. And I'm just trying to look like where his eyes looking. Like, all right, his eyes are going to, his eyes are looking right here. No, his eyes are looking down here. Where's Tom looking at? No, Tom's looking at the concrete too. I'm just making a joke.
He's actually, out of all the people that we see working, the one who stands out the most for me.
Me too. He's the most chiseled. He's a
centered person. The most
Yeah.
scented, standing out guy uh, amongst everyone. I'm not putting the others down, but there's something about him, with or without the shirt.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then so the dome is built, and so they start having, then another of the dome people got up to tell about some of the things that were happening inside the dome. Quote, "We get together for a town meeting every 2 weeks and decide what we'll do, and everyone has a chance to agree or disagree. Being in a circular building makes it easier to see how people react and to rap and to listen and to finally to decide." One after another, the Dome people told of what they had been doing, of plays they had been writing and produced, of concerts and how the Dome's shape was excellent for performing and listening to music. And they told how they decided who would take responsibility for the maintaining of the Dome, for cleaning it and making it exactly what they wanted it to be. Well, as we're going to learn, these days of plays and this idealism here quickly went away because the Dome ended up a haven for druggies and it descended into a total morass of drug use, and eventually the neighborhood just wanted it gone. It became a blight, a stain.
Well, as Richard Stein told me, though, because they couldn't get money, politics started to get involved. There were people who, from the beginning, hated it. And these people one or two seemed to gain power in city government. And it could have continued, but the elite lost interest.
Right, the elite lost interest, which ties back to my hypothesis that the point was not to keep this thing up. The point was to build it and to do whatever experiments, psychological experiments they were running during the building of it. And I believe during the initial phases when they were all in there collectivizing, talking about, the things that we're going to expose to the audience pretty soon about the ideology, they were talking about Chinese collectivism in there. They were talking about how great the socialist model of China was, and
Huh?
they were training it to these children in there. So I am concerned about that and very, very interested in the social workers, the psychiatrists who were part of this project.
Well, Richard Stein knew nothing of that because soon after he did the architectural design, he left to live in Delaware County because he was excluded from the draft. He was a conscientious objector. So he
Right.
so he had to go away because I did ask him, there was this term that Alphonse Gavila doesn't even know about. Let me just say quickly to people, Gavila left and there was such an outcry. He was much loved by people at the Dome. He was so
Right.
loved that.
Eric, let's not get into those because unless we understand the context here, but we haven't brought the audience up to
Yeah,
speed.
what they do right though is mind games. That Laurie Goodman and Karen Fried say that he played mind games. He wasn't. And then right next to it is the Mao Zedong communism of people in New York who don't even know the slaughters that are going on in China, speaking about collectivization farms and industry in China have helped eliminate centuries of hunger and deprivation. Nothing could be further from the truth than that.
Right, and what Eric is just talking about are pieces of journalism that's from the Undercurrents, which was the newsletter of the Dome, and we're going to get into those in future episodes. We're trying to keep today's episode light.
Yeah,
We're trying not to make people think too much today.
no.
We're just bringing up the Dome, showing the pictures, kind of getting a feel for this place, the experiment behind the minds behind it, the elite institution behind it. So this all started from the Riverdale Neighborhood House, which again was started by the Dodge family. And I think that this is probably going to be the best thing to show the audience because, well, people nowadays love movies. So Eric, get ready to boogie in as we watch together with the audience. And by the way, audience, we're going to be pausing every now and then to comment. Out of Space, about the Dome people, 1972, Riverdale Neighborhood House. Enjoy.
Great.
yeah. I must say that this movie will be enhanced if you smoke some weed.
I work with kids now, and I see them trying to grow up here, and I
This is Pizer Edelsack, by the way. This is the voice of Pizer Edelsack.
don't see a lot of room for people to grow up. I see a lot of pretty things and a lot of things that a lot of adults want.
There wasn't a lot of room to grow up when I was here,
Yeah, but maybe there was a little more. I mean, I don't think the apartment buildings had come in yet, and I don't think that the real money had, established its lifestyle here in such a way that it was.
We already have things to unpack, Eric.
Well, John Rosen is a photographer in one of the games that they play at the Riverdale Press.
Forget about that. I strictly want to comment on what we just heard. First of all, he said there wasn't room to grow up in Riverdale. So these kids needed a space for room to grow up. I didn't have the dome growing up. I had plenty of room. I grew up in Riverdale. I had the woods. I had my backyard. I had the park across the street. I had plenty of room to be myself. I didn't need the dome. So that makes no sense. But also notice what he says, Eric. He says right there, remember, this guy is working for the Dodge family. He goes, oh, the money hadn't been established in Riverdale yet. There was no money here yet. Meanwhile, he's working for the very people who own Dodge Phelps Mining Company.
Well, the money had been there since the 19th century.
Correct.
And at the same time, that being 10 years older than you, maybe I'm 15 years older than you, I can tell you right now that was typical talk throughout America at that time. I remember in high school, not Riverdale, Lawrence, it may even be true what he said, that since 1955, the youth hasn't been treated nice in this country. All that type of stuff was coming out as if there was no life, no culture, no fun.
As if kids needed this dome to be themselves when kids hundreds of thousands of years before and decades after have been themselves without the dome. It just doesn't make sense. But the thing about him talking about the moneyed people in Riverdale, that already strikes a red flag to me, because this guy was working for the Dodge family, maybe not directly, but he was working for one of the wealthiest industrial families in the world. And they seemingly continued to sponsor him as he continued along on his march into the institutions. Mm-hmm. Right? All right, let's carry on.
Buildings had come in yet, and I don't think that the real money had, established its lifestyle here in such a way that it was, really infringing on the rights of young people.
Well, that's true. I mean, it wasn't as incredibly prominent as it is today.
I mean, I don't see young people having a place to be, or a kind of just a space, an emotional space, a conceptual space to be human beings in, to be respected.
Well, why would that these teenagers need that kind of space in a community with this much?
This much what? This much wealth, this much consumption, this many buildings, this many lawns, this many parks, this many schools, this many private clubs. Yeah, it's got a lot of those things, but what about, the cat on the street? Values have to be respected, and that's what the community looks like, but there has to be some space within those values for new values to develop. And if we don't look to young people for some leadership, we're going to die. It's going to become a decadent thing.
Can a teenager accept anybody's territory but his own?
Maybe, maybe not. I think that a teenager shouldn't have to share his territory. I mean, what is a teenager? It's just somebody who's not something else. I mean, I don't know that we have to call them teenagers. They're young people, and young people need a place. And
that's an interesting thing. I don't think we need to call them teenagers. He's trying to change the definition of what a kid is.
Yeah, well, it's it begins in the 50s, where you start to get a culture of this so-called generation gap, and it's deconstructionist, breakup of family, breakup of all moral values. Where does this come from that the children, I don't want to make the man a subversive, but you go back to the 20s, the national child labor movement to stop child labor, and then they say the state must take the children over away from the parents.
Right, right. Like what's weird is that he's talking about that them having a space to be themselves, but then there's all these psychiatrists involved that are doing experiments with the kids where they're putting their ego into a coin and then giving a coin to another person. Well, we're going to read about all this stuff, guys.
Well, that's what I was referring to about the mind games, which Gavila doesn't even remember.
Right. So anyway, very strange stuff. What Pizer Edelsack is saying is, in my opinion, if you read between the lines, is extremely subversive. It's just it's separating kids from their families. Anyway, let's carry on.
Just as their parents have bought these fancy homes and these big buildings and put plastic on the couches and color TVs in every room and air conditioned the place till you think you live in a refrigerator, it's like, I think kids need a place to be productive and a place of their own and a place to begin to discover who they are and what they want to be.
Eric, you didn't tell me you acted in this.
Me? That's me?
Just kidding.
They wanted me to model.
By the way, everybody should know that this is Johnson Avenue, this area right here, where they've been showing, and that's how the Dome started. They took all the kids from Johnson Avenue who were hanging out, and they corralled them all over in Seton Park to help build the Dome.
I get finished fucking, but then I'll probably go back shooting dope.
So you only get into trouble.
Right, you sort of like took the, proverbial dive.
It bothers me because they look like they have nothing to do.
I'll tell you to get off the street.
A man over 17 is not a kid. See, kids seem to be lost.
They come by here every night and they tell us that we can't hang out here. They say go to the park. So we go to the park and play ball, and then they come by and tell us that we can't play ball because...
Maybe it's a desire just to be together.
They don't have any special interests.
The avenue blows.
Ivan
and I was sitting on the steps over there the other night. Cop comes over, shines a light in the eyes. Guy walks over, grabs us by the neck, looks at our arms. Nothing on arms. He calls us dirty, stinking junkies. I start walking down the street and he kicks me in the ass, says I'm not moving fast enough.
Life is too short to stand around.
They should do something for them. I mean, the school doesn't have anything going.
Oh, I think there's a great need for that.
They built on every available spot.
I do not know personally what the needs or the requests of the young people might be outside the church.
We're in the Jewish business, so to speak,
Both corners converge, man. You used to have the Jews over here and the Irish over there. Now you have the Jews and the Irish. Now you have the Jews and the Irish dope fiends, man.
You gotta do something for yourself.
We needed a space, or we really shouldn't spend the money on the street. And then the idea of a dome and Buckminster Fuller's feeling that people can do it and do it with less and do it cheaply came up, and a lot of really fine people who were here that night said, hey, let's try. And it's going to be a coming together of people.
Ain't seen nothing but sunshine for just about 40 days. It burned my corn and I ain't got nothing to sell. Working so hard and tend my fields, yeah, I almost paid them all.
I would have been in love with her, by the way.
Yeah. There's something poignant here, though. I'm not defending Pizer. I mean, but it's multifaceted, Manny. After World War II, with the affluence that started in the creation of the middle classes, let's say people who were working class and suddenly became middle class, and the affluence, there was little by little by little a decline in even families of the values of the people who came over from Europe and really worked hard. There was a decline within them without any political manipulation. And you have an American youth, as opposed to Europe or even parts of Latin America, growing up without any culture. The education becomes a disaster. You start to have people who can't even read properly. They don't study the literature Americans did before. And it just declines. And I think that is met with a manipulation of saying, well, here's a new way of life. What existed before doesn't. It's interwoven, Manny. It's not one dimensional, but I still think there's something evil, and that is the drug culture. Conquer the society with narcotics.
Right.
The way the British did with China, with the East India Company and the opium. Conquer the society with narcotics, make them feel they know better than the adults because the adults have failed. And there were a lot of adults that failed.
Right. Like Pizer was trying to pit the youth against the adults in this. And that to me was the beginning of the end of the American experiment, because it wasn't like that before the counterculture of the 60s. Children and the youth were lower than the adults, as they should be. Like we didn't look to the youth, right? And now we see the ultimate embodiment of that in this Greta Thunberg character, right? All these people are worshiping this.
Look what's going on today. But you see, this is the mistake I would disagree with Pizer Edelsack on. If you see the youth are suffering, the drug addiction, they have no direction even at home, why bring in then the economics of, well, look at these homes and this comfort and this and that? Is that a way to live? Well, people worked hard to have those homes.
Right.
And the irony is that they're knocking them, he is, and maybe others, because they have this affluence, but yet it's the affluence that is financing this.
Correct.
It's the affluence that is always financing everything. Soros today.
The very people who he's railing against in this video are the people who were paying his bills. And that ultimately is another running theme throughout our work in this particular series, Eric, is that it seems like, just what I basically just said. They're biting the hand that feeds, and it makes no sense.
Let me give you a quote. Okay, everybody says communism, workers of the world unite. Here's a quote from Lenin when he said to Angela Balabanov, spend millions, spend millions, spend millions. We have all the money we want at our disposal, spend millions. You see what I mean? They sell a utopia, but there's money financing these people at the top.
Correct. And we just have to stay real. This dome project might have started with very idealistic reasons, and the kids who were working in this video that we see here might have had the best experience of their lives, but it ended in a drug-fueled orgy and morass, and then getting arsoned by somebody. It could have been David Berkowitz. So it went wrong. The elite lost interest, and it turned into a horrible nightmare. And so that's the reality of this. And that's kind of, in a way, it's kind of, as we're talking about this, Eric, it's a microcosm of what they did to the entire country. They turned it into a nightmare.
Well, now even Europe and parts of Latin America, it's a nightmare. The whole thing at this point, Colombia wasn't even a big drug exporting place. It's a horror, and I can't help but think that there's a technology of evil at work someplace. And but what I want to know is this: what did Pizer think? Did he ever write? Did he ever make statements when he left this project and went to be a principal of the mental health alternative school? What was his thoughts? I mean, you put so much passion into this. What happens?
Right.
Did he have? Now, I'm not speaking against the gentleman, But did he, because Richard couldn't answer this, even though they remained friends, or he didn't answer it. Not that he couldn't. I didn't ask. What did Pizer carry within his heart, like many? This was my dream. I've gone forward in life, but look at what happened to my dream. That's what I'm interested in. Without condemning the man right off, I want to know what he thought, what he felt.
Right, because he had to know what happened to his brainchild, the dome. He had to have known what ended up becoming of this place. All right, let's carry on with the movie.
Now the sun's so hot, my dog gets better and die. Pulling my plow. Oh, I wish it rained now. Just give me some water. Oh, I get so thirsty. I want the good Lord send me some rain to ease my mind. Build my house a history in my life.
Well, I remember in the beginning how we used to wake up in the tents that we were using to camp out there, take the blueprints and figure out on the soil exactly where
There's
all
Pizer.
the foundation
There's
posts
Pizer.
would be. We started out digging by hand and just with shovels.
Wait,
And
hold
it
on,
seemed
Eric, because there's
like
that
I
lady.
remember in the beginning how
Remember how I said that lady from Albany, possibly?
Yeah.
we used
She
to
was right next to him.
wake up in
Watch.
the tents
Sunglasses
that we
on.
were using
Yeah.
to camp out there, take the blueprints and figure out on
Right
the
here.
soil exactly where all the foundation
That's
poles
her.
would be. We started out digging by hand and just with shovels, and it seemed it was a little hard to do it that way, and we got some picks and people would chop up the soil and then dig it out. And once we ran into rock, we got pneumatic hammers, I guess they are, and went through it.
Now the well outside has run dry.
Not for nothing, but these two kids aren't doing anything. They're just picking up soil and putting it from one place to another. They're not really doing anything. Uh-oh. Volkswagen Beetle in the back.
Morning, said he wants to buy my land. Well, I just want one more.
There's that lady.
Try letting you go.
Yeah, you should disturb me.
Oh, I wish it rained.
Got your name?
Water.
We'll find out who she is.
Get so thirsty. Now won't the good Lord send me some rain?
There's Pizer
My mind.
on the left.
Now it's hot and dry again. Won't my troubles never end? But now he don't hear me cry. There ain't a dark cloud in the sky.
This is the first positive, constructive project that I have seen done here. You can take all your Johnson Avenue cleanups and all your park cleanups and pick up papers, because the next week it's dirty again.
Pizer.
But this is a positive statement by the kids here, and it's absolutely fantastic.
And then one morning, the truck came and delivered an enormous amount of wood, which went on top of the foundation poles, sort of the joists to hold up the floor. And we paired the wood together. We brought the wood to where it would be and nailed it together, because it would be too heavy to carry if we nailed it before. And then measured exactly where everything would be.
I wonder if we could find Ruth Rea Howell in these footage, because she said she was there every day photographing. So I'm going to look out from now on for an older middle-aged woman with a camera. I'm sorry?
She must have spoken well of it to her social circles.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, she was a main person at the Riverdale Neighborhood House along with her husband.
And did you see Pies' enthusiasm taking the lumber off the truck? He is sincerely into it.
He was a dynamic dude, and he loved hanging around with the kids. I'll give him that.
We put main beams in the floor. Then, attaching the beams to each other, we used smaller boards and 2x6s. And then on top of that, we insulated that with styrofoam sheets, then put a plastic layer on that to sort of weatherproof it or waterproof it, whatever. And then on top of that, a plywood floor.
Hey, that's Alphonse.
There he is. There he is.
Okay, this is Alphonse Gavila. This is the man that we're talking to. We already heard Tom Martin, saw Tom Martin in the photographs, but this is Alphonse Gavila. So he was there, just like well, actually, it seemed like he was there earlier than he told us, Eric, because you said that he was here building it before the fiberglass.
Right. But this confirms that it's earlier than what he told us, but the early alluded to by Richard Stein.
Right, exactly.
And he invited him in. Let me say one thing important. In this film, there's the part of the narration is exactly what Tom Martin told you, and it must have been indicative of the area. The Jewish kids were smoking the marijuana, the Irish were drinking, and the Jewish kids and Irish kids both met and intermingled then.
And especially at the Dome too.
Yeah.
And I was told in those years that a lot of the Irish kids were dope fiends, were junkies, especially at a school called St. Gabe's. I was told by a person who went there in the 70s, she was like, Manny, that place was filled with junkies. So, you know, it's all kind of bearing out in this video. All right, let's check it out. Let's keep going. So this is the motorcycle dude, guys. Everybody out there who left New York in '76, and he was at Untermeyer Park and saw. Well, he told us he saw satanic rituals there. He's just straight up.
Frame went up very quickly, but it went up wrong. And we took it down and built it again, took it down again, and the third time we put it up right. And everyone was waiting for that. And we had then finally, when the last hub was tightened, we had our celebration, drinking champagne out of Con Edison hats and so on. And it was sort of a turning point in building the dome. Everyone had a really good feeling about that. It was the first time we could actually see what it looked like, and it really looked better than anyone expected. It was really unbelievable that even we actually got it done.
It was just a corral. There was dirt, and there was a wooden ring, and that was it.
You don't just think of it as a building, but it's actually, you know, like a person.
Don't over-tighten it, Mark. Richie, what? I want an orientation, okay?
I wonder if that was Richie Stein.
Mark is an A, right? Mark is at all A's, right? An A, and then there's a B from Rick over there. Right. Okay. Then all around here there's C's. Put it in, Rick. There's a B there and a C there. Next is a C, and that's a B going across, right? Right, but he won't get that in.
That might be Ruth Rea Howell right
And
there.
a C there. Next
Look.
is a C, and that's a B.
This right here. She's taking pictures.
Yeah, with almost like a dress on down below.
Well, this right here, the one right in the center.
Yeah.
Watch that lady. She's going to take a picture. I wonder if that's Ruth Rea Howell.
Going across, right? Right, but he won't get that in. That's a B going, yeah. He gets a B going over to the pen and a B going over to the head. No, he's got a B there. Right, and a C going. Now you got me.
The dome itself looks really out of sight. I'm sort of impressed with the way the work's going so quickly. And it's sort of nice to see a lot of people around that you've seen before all over Riverdale. Doing all sorts of weird and odd things. And now they all seem to have a purpose and they're doing something intelligent.
My nose hasn't sweated in a long time.
The way this is built, it'll be here after some of the skyscrapers are gone.
Did you hear what he just said, Eric? The way this is built, it'll be here after the skyscrapers are gone. Well,
yeah, the idealism of it all. And what he said right there is positive. That was the main reason. Now the kids have something to do because they were lost, and that's positive.
It is positive. It is positive. I just can't help but think, was there a dark undercurrent to this thing that we still have to flesh out? An occult hidden meaning behind it all.
Well, you might be correct. You very well may be correct. I think that the big question, as I said, is what was his feelings throughout his life that this dream failed?
Right. Well, hopefully we'll find out. Just have a few more minutes of this movie, and then the show will be finished.
After the frame, we had to put on the shell, which was a plywood triangles that we nailed onto the frame.
Out and the dome's being lit up by those lights. It's more than all the technical garbage that we've been running around with and yelling and the struts and the A's and B's and C's.
Good question. I don't know.
And it's more than all those people coming in and saying, isn't it wonderful and good for the community? And all the rest that they're saying, which is fine and good, and they're enthusiastic and happy, but it's more than that now. It's poetry and it's music and it's bigger than all of us, and it's all of us in there and all those nails that each of us hit in, and it's amazing and very moving. God, I don't believe it. You can't even say it. There aren't any even words. Cliche, but there aren't. It's just that amazing dome.
Well, Eric, whoops.
Very interesting.
I feel like I just took a tab of acid just watching that end part, all that analog delay and all.
Well, the young lady speaking makes me sad.
Yeah,
there was hope, but there is one good thing. The architecture shown, the cross-cutting, and while she's speaking, and the architecture shown are not the beautiful homes of Riverdale. That's the social realism apartment buildings, which don't look too nice.
Yeah, Riverdale is a middle and upper middle class community, and also a very wealthy community. But yeah, the buildings in Riverdale, a lot of them are very old and kind of in shabby condition.
But that was like post World War II type of structures.
Yeah, kind of communist in a way.
Where there was no social realism type. It wasn't much to, what inspiration does it give a person when you see structures like that? I remember, can I just tell a quick story? In the Bronx, somebody said, come to this Columbus Day parade. I wasn't interested. There's a bunch of Italians, and there was a Sicilian man they made fun of. He had a tear in his jacket, his coat, big hands. He probably could do fantastic marble work. And we come to a building. I thought it was a prison. It was a high school. Titanium steel doors, bars in front of the windows, glass on top in cement and barbed wire. And this simple Sicilian man visiting from Sicily said, what spiritual interest can a child have for education going into a building like this?
It's a good point. It's a good point. And
to that.
I mean, listen, from what it's seeming to me, the dome was a mixture of idealism tinged with the current counterculture at the time, and we have a lot to unpack with it. I was very glad to do this show with you, Eric, today as a little intro. We should end now because it's 2 hours in.
I'm not angry because of the phone ringing.
I forgot all about it.
Yeah,
but
I get angry. I never forgive myself.
Forgive yourself.
Very, very sad. And I'm going to do further research with 2 contacts that I have, maybe 3, to find out what he must have felt if he was sincere. And I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt that he was. I spoke to Richard Stein for almost 2 hours. What did he feel when it ended? What did he feel when he knew that they ended up living in there taking drugs? And
right.
A total inversion
of his brainchild. Right. This was his way to get the kids off the street and get them into a positive environment. According to Richie Stein, he was heavily anti-drug. Although in that article in the New York Times, I'm not so sure about that, because he just said, hey, if you want to smoke a joint, go somewhere else and do it. So that doesn't sound too anti-drug to me. But yeah, his brainchild of wanting to create this idealistic space for kids to be themselves and to have this space all to themselves ended up becoming a drug-fueled orgy and morass, and ended up getting arson down
Well, there
in
were people way
1977.
up there who wanted people to take drugs, even in big business. Remember Sonny and Cher?
Hmm.
Yeah, all right. They said, I don't even think you were born when this took place. They said at the height of their career, when they were first famous, biggest duo in rock and roll since the Everly Brothers, said, stop taking narcotics. Overnight, we're supposed to believe they no longer sold records. And they were almost banned, blackballed, blacklisted because they made that announcement.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, we're not the first people obviously to look at the late 60s counterculture, but clearly there was a lot of social engineering going on towards wrecking society and using drugs as using youth and the drugs as the bulwark. Because remember, this was the baby boomers. All these kids working on the Dome were born in the early 1950s, early 1960s, and there were gazillions of these kids around. So they were corralled by a very effective ruling class back then, and they were the tip of the spear against society, and drugs fueled it. And so, what role did the Dome play in that? What was the Dome? Well, we don't know, but Eric, you and I are going to be parking in the rear for a little bit longer on this one for sure.
Coming, people will be surprised. And I just want to say, I'm not anti-religion. I try to be Christ-centric, but I do blame, at that period, the Second Vatican Council Church of so-called Catholicism. I blame Orthodox Jews. I blame people of other religions that should have been there for them and say, take my hand, let me help you. Where were they?
They allowed people like Pizer Edelsack and the Riverdale Neighborhood House psychiatrists to get to them instead, and that's going to be the topics for future episodes.
That's
so
right.
so Eric, hey man, great show today. Stick around, please, so I can say goodbye off the air. And you have any quick final words for the audience?
Just stay tuned, because this is a very serious show we're doing. We're not giving this on a silver platter like the Son of Sam case, or if one wanted to study the Manson case, as convoluted historically as those cases are. This is even more interesting, and there's something ever so eerie about the whole thing, because we're led to this Dome by way of the strange death of Alfred Hunt Howell Sr., because his wife is the one who writes the book and loves this project. And can I say where the Steins lived? The Richard Stein lived at, I think, 3,450 Greystone Avenue.
No, 3,900 Greystone. They lived in the
3,900, 3,900 Greystone Avenue. And my friends out there who also lived in that home, and I'm not connecting the two, Nikolai Andreaman. The interconnections are eerie.
Absolutely. All right, Eric, thank you so much. Stick around. I'm saying goodbye to you off the air. All right. I always cut Eric off too quickly when he's in the middle of his goodbyes. But anyway, all right, guys. So listen, 2 hours and 8 minutes in, this was a monster show. So happy that, well, 60 of you stuck around from a height of about 80 watching it at one point, which is numbers that I cannot believe. I thought that nobody would be interested in this. And hey, maybe after today you won't, but doesn't matter. Why? Because I'm interested in it, and hopefully I'm bringing you guys along for the ride. No, I seriously think that this is truly fresh and original research in the community here that we all deal with. These are networks that have never been talked about, looked at, investigated, analyzed, and it's seeming, because of the worldwide import of what these people were into, American University of Beirut, the UN, Henry Morgenthau, Woodrow Wilson, Samuel Untermeyer even gets involved in as a player in some of this stuff, that we have stumbled onto a nest of elite deep staters potentially that you never heard of. And of course, one of their projects was the Seton Park Dome. So stay tuned, everybody. We will be putting up shows as they come along. We're going to continue parking in the RIA for as long as it takes. There's going to be many topics within parking in the RIA, the Dome just one of them. So hopefully you guys will keep on enjoying yourselves. And I want to say thank you so much. And we will see you at the next show of parking in the RIA. All right, guys, take care.